So welcome again, everybody. With this year's report covering both your fiscal year 21 allotment award and the American Rescue Plan Act funds, there's a lot going on. We also had changes to our regulations that affected some timelines this year. And there's a number of extensions that are happening. So with all that, we thought it would be a really good idea to gather you together and do a refresher on the SPR. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dennis.
Thank you, Terry. As Terry mentioned, we are covering a lot. And so this is a brief overview. I'm not going to go through every bullet, but here's a little preview of coming attractions for how we're structuring today's webinar. The first half, as Terry mentioned, is sort of newly released updates and changes that make this year's reporting cycle a little different from previous years. And then a little bit later on, we kind of move into general best practices as a reminder or new information for those of you who might be new. And then we end with more new things, but more on the technological side of things. So without further ado, we'll head right into it. First thing I want to mention is the upcoming reporting deadlines and how they differ from previous years. This is the first reporting year that the new 2 CFR 200 regulations go into effect. So it gives the states 120 days to report the FY 2021 awards, which pushes it from a late December deadline, which some of you might be used to a late January one. And even though under normal circumstances, extensions are rare for the Grants to States program, we, as many of you know, have made some exceptions for ARPA due to supply chain issues and other factors outside of your control. So many of you may have later reporting deadlines that you can confirm what those actual deadlines are by going into EGMS Reach. There's a reporting schedule area to help keep things straight, if you will. And we just also want to remind everyone that if you're unable to meet your reporting deadline, to please contact us before that deadline so we can work with you, find out what's going on, and potentially get an extension lined up in advance of the deadline. This is another slide kind of breaking out what the 2 CFR says specifically about the reporting schedule. And so we covered this change at our virtual conference, but that was 2 years ago when we first awarded the 2021 awards. So we thought that it would be helpful now that the awards are coming to an end to bring these back up and to sort of outline that this is a regulatory change across federal awards. And it shifts to 120 days, as I mentioned before, after the deadline. There's a however, though, so it's not a blanket change of 120 days, which is why we wanted to break this out very clearly. Subrecipient reports that come into you, if you have subrecipients, still have the 90-day deadline for reporting and your own annual reports that you submit to IMLS. So we don't always call them annual reports. You might be more familiar with them being referred to as an interim federal financial report, and we call them annual reports because we receive them from you every year. That deadline hasn't changed, so that will still be the end of December, even though your final reports on the SPR will be the end of January. Another reminder related to the 120-day period is that you have 120 days now to liquidate your funds. So this is a little snapshot from, or a little quote rather, from the 2021 grant States Award Guidance, 30th of 2022. And then all financial obligations that have been incurred under the award must be liquidated by January 30th. Because understandably so, with ARPA, lots of money. So there's, a lot of different ways that you're spending it that's unusual. And then also because of the extended timeline, we've been receiving a lot of questions about this. And so we just want to make clear that the project period, the grant period is still at the end of September 30th. So the activities must be completed, and there has to be an indication that funds related to that project have been obligated by then. But you have until January 30th just to reconcile your finances and make sure that everything is paid out. And that also includes drawdowns from EGMS Reach as well. And another reminder, especially because so much of what we do is in EGMS and it's a very helpful system. Grants to States, as many of you know, is a unique program that doesn't always fit the conventional structure of other grant awards. So we use EGMS for some things, but we do not use EGMS for submitting your reports. You submit all your reports through the SPR for anything related to grants to states. That includes your interim FFR, your project reports, and your final financial status report. And again, because we're all about reminding and refreshing, and because we figured that will be helpful, especially this year, even if you have an ARPA extension, and if you have an extension for one of your awards, I'm bringing up ARPA because that's the award that we've seen the most extensions for. You won't be able to certify your SPR until both awards are finalized, because the SPR is viewing your awards, both for the allotment and for ARPA, as one. And so there's no way to differentiate between your regular allotment and your ARPA awards in the SPR as far as certifying goes. So it's like, once you certify, it'll be once all of your projects are complete. And many of you may have two different deadlines for your regular allotment awards and your ARPA awards. So you should still enter all the project details for the grant that hasn't received an extension by the original deadline. This is typically, as I mentioned, January 2023. Normally, what we would do as program officers we would wait until a project had a certified status attached to it to start reviewing them. But since that's not possible until both the allotment and ARPA projects are complete, we will look for your allotment projects, the projects that don't have an extension, to have a completed status by the end of January 2023 before we start reviewing them. That will be our signal this year, as opposed to waiting for everything to be certified. And of course, if you finish reporting early for an award that doesn't have an extension, please let us know. We will be happy to get started on reviewing them as early as possible. Also, a reminder related to certain deadlines that are immune to extensions is we are asking you to put in your MOE figure into the final FSR by March 1st of 2023, so we can prepare for the annual MOE paperwork. So this is, as you know, would be unusual. You usually would put in your MOE along with your FSR and sort of bundle that up, and we would review that all at once. This is a very unique circumstance. This is a year of unique circumstances. And you know, there's several reasons why we are asking you to make sure your MOE is in by March 1st. First of all, ARPA doesn't have a match or MOE requirement. So MOE runs according to the federal fiscal year anyway, not your period of performance. So there should theoretically not be an issue with these figures being ready and available to provide here. And another reason why we're asking you to put this in by March 1st is if your MOE figure, it happens to be less than the minimum requirement, it sort of initiates a timeline for us where we will follow up with you by early April with instructions on how to request an MOE waiver. That's an optional process, but the whole point with sharing all of this is that there's a bit of a cause and effect, that we need to make sure things are wrapped up in time for subsequent award allotments, because it's possible that FY 2024 allotments would be reduced by the amount that you missed your MOE. So all of that to say that we need that information in by March 1st of 2023. And another update is the unique entity identifier that took effect this April. We have updated our systems to reflect the UEI, and so the DUNS is not showing up on our fields anymore. It's just UEI. And we are asking everyone to update their state info section of the SPR, which you see in this slide, is highlighted as far as where to update that. Unlike the DUNS, it has letters and numbers, and it will be longer, which the UEI has 12 characters. And if you're not quite sure what your UEI is, you can find it in sam.gov. Or we can help you access it as well if you run into any issues, your program officers. The FSR, the financial status report, and your annual interim FFR, it auto-populates this UEI number from this state info section, which is why we're asking you to, if you update it here, your other forms will have an accurate UEI information on there. Now I'm going to hand it over to Laura to talk about entering the interim FFR data.
Thank you, Dennis. Hello, everyone. Now I will be reviewing how to enter your interim FFR data for your fiscal year 2022 allotment award. We've had to return a lot of these reports in recent years, so we just wanted to go over some common issues. And here's the path where you can access the interim FFR in the SPR. And for the FFR federal agency grant number, make sure you write in the allotment log number, and you can find this in the IMLS EGMS reach system, as well as on your official award notification document that's seen here and highlighted in red there at the bottom. The total federal funds authorized field is auto-populated, and that reflects the fiscal year 2022 allotment. You may have to open the report and hit save for the auto-populated fields to appear. The federal share of expenditures will be how much you've expended on your award as of September 30th, 2022. And you can find this information in EGMS under the payments area. The total recipient share required field is also auto-populated, and that reflects the allotment match requirement. And in the recipient share of expenditures field, you will report on how much you've contributed to match so far. And as I mentioned before, in recent years, we've been returning a lot of the interim FFRs. So we've highlighted a few of the common issues that we've noticed. Remember that the cash disbursements should match EGMS reach payments as of September 30th, 2022. And the amount in cash disbursements typically matches the federal share of expenditures. And you should leave the indirect expenses blank, as well as the program income is also typically left blank. And we've also included a link here at the bottom of the slide where you can see some more tips. And we also wanted to note that the certification is a little bit different with the interim FFR. This sometimes falls through the cracks, and we have to follow up. The SLAA chief needs to certify by the reporting deadline of December 30th, 2022. And you can ensure the certification went through by looking at the certification fields, which are noted here in the interim FFR. And once certified, should contain the name of the chief and a date stamp. And here is a screenshot just showing where you can find the amount drawn down in reach. First, go to the payments tab in the 2022 award record. Then you look at the total approved requests figure as seen circled here in the middle of the page. And be sure to look at the request status date. That's also shown here, and subtract any requests approved after September 30th, 2022. And with that, back to Dennis.
Thank you, Laura. I am here with our favorite visual timeline, which is a mainstay of our presentations, and hopefully is a helpful visualization of sort of how our award cycle works and how they overlap with each other. So if you haven't seen this timeline from us before, the light colored bar is the period of performance. That's what it represents. And then the block after that, the darker block at the end, is the time you have to submit your report. So this is also a reminder to kind of just visualize that the ARPA award ran parallel with your FY 2021 award. And it also ended September 30th along with your allotment award, unless you had an extension. And so the FY 2022 award won't end until September 30th of next year. So this year you have two reports. You have your final financial report for the FY 2021 award and ARPA. So it's one report that combines both of the award information. And then you have an interim financial report for your FY 2022 award. So that's a kind of a midterm check-in, so to speak, of what's happening with your currently open FY 2022 award. And we also want to remind you here that the next 2 years of reporting, this seems kind of bizarre, but it's just kind of the way the timeline of the grant periods work. The next 2 years of reporting will still reference the 2018 to 2022 5-year plan goals. So when you're in the SPR and you're adding projects, you'll still be referring to those goals and how each of those projects met those goals. So we won't prompt you to update them in the update your goals in the SPR with your new 5-year plan goals until the summer of 2024. So that might not make a lot of sense in the abstract, but we just wanted to give you a heads up that if you see quote unquote old goals in the SPR, that's not an accident. You'll also want to complete the project reports first in the SPR, because the financial figures roll up, the financial figures that are in your projects, they roll up into your financial status report. So we wanted to give you a snapshot of what filling in the SPR will look like here. As you can see, and as I mentioned earlier, both your FY 2021 allotment and your ARPA award will be reported in the same part of the SPR. You'll have one long list of projects, and there'll be a mixture of your allotment awards and your ARPA awards. And so in order to differentiate the ARPA projects, and as a FYI, this helped us tremendously back with CARES. And this is why we're asking you to do it again for ARPA. Give all of their ARPA projects a title prefix of ARPA. As you can see highlighted in red here, ARPA : and then the project title. And another note is that none of your ARPA projects should have a start date that occurs before April 8th of 2021. As you saw from that timeline slide, the ARPA period is shorter than the larger 2021 grant period. So just be aware of that. Sometimes with the regular 2-year allotment period, it goes to the default and your projects are that entire 2-year period. So you don't have to do a lot of changing to the dates. This year, because of so many different changes with the dates, not only the start date, but also if you have an extension for your ARPA funds, be mindful of what the end date says also, because we would expect it to kind of end at the end of your extension instead of the original grant period. And another reminder, especially with us having so much distance from the time that we originally gave the ARPA awards out, we recognize that ARPA was such a large infusion of money, and we really do appreciate all the creative ways that you've spent it. This is just a reminder to frame the spending in your project narrative as pandemic response as much as you possibly can. Responding to the pandemic, recovery, all of those things. And just also another note that if your subrecipients don't do this, that it would be helpful from an intermediary perspective as the coordinator or state library representative, that you might need to work it into the SPR in this pandemic response kind of framing. We also encourage you to, as much as possible, report the ARPA projects separately. We also recognize, though, that some of your projects that you already have that are ongoing a lot, state library projects may have had like an infusion of ARPA funds. So you may not be able to differentiate them as separate projects. But if that occurs, then we ask you to differentiate them in the budget narrative. So there's an example slide here of there being one large number for supplies and materials, but then in that budget description, you very clearly see how much of that $3,700 was LSTA funds and how much of it was ARPA funds. We've used this slide before. Hats off to Nevada for being a helpful example. But we gave states quite a bit of flexibility in reporting the stimulus funds last year, especially because we hadn't done it before and there was so much happening very quickly. And what we wanted to do is give you an example of the kind of data points that was showing that we received in the CARES project reports that painted an immediate picture of impact. And again, we don't expect your projects to have every example of this, but it's a nice cross-section of what's possible. And you can even see yourself visually how easy it is to understand the impact. And it's not just numbers, but we saw some really helpful sound bites as well. It really helps us speak to the impact of ARPA as well. And that kind of brings us to our next slide, which we are showing you a national analysis that we did with CARES last year as a way to kind of give you all a national perspective of what we use your data for. So as you're preparing your ARPA data for us, be thinking about how we could most easily put a national analysis together, which, as you might all imagine, there's a lot of attention to how we spent CARES funds, how agencies, worked with ARPA funds and your utility. So if you keep this framing in mind when you report, it will help us tell a better national story. And, we, even with the CARES, we saw states reporting numbers where it made sense to them, but the numbers were there. And so that was kind of the most important thing, is that whether they were in SPR narratives, budgets, or quantities, we were able to pick them out and put them together in this way. And another element that is sort of unique, at least in every 5-year period, is reflecting the 5-year evaluation or plan activity, especially if it was if LSTA funds were used to fund any or all of it. And this could be under project funds or administrative funds or match funds could have supported the development of your 5-year evaluation or plan. You should have it reported in the SPR. And we want to encourage you to use the activity mode of planning and evaluation. And we have a link here that should be clickable, at least in the PDF that is linked in the chat, of examples you can look at in the SPR public view through that link, if you need examples. So as far as how ARPA and your regular funds relate to the 4% administrative project, the total reporting of which for the administrative project reflects a combination of both awards. So as you may remember from previous conversations, the 4% cap applies to not just your regular allotment, but your ARPA award as well, which is obviously significantly higher than usual. It's an option to use any or all of the allowable 4%. It's not a requirement to meet it. There is no sort of formula behind it that would affect you in future years. It's very year by year, and you just have the ability to use up to 4%. And we also want to take this opportunity to remind everybody that the administrative project can include state or other match. So if state funds or other kinds of funds were used to help support the administration of LSTA in your state, those funds are not subject to the 4% cap, but it is helpful to have reported what funds are helping to support the program. So on this slide, it kind of lays out what you would expect to see on the financial status report area under administrative costs. And again, this is typically a very straightforward thing, but because of the fact that we're combining two awards, we want to lay it out and make it as clear as possible for everybody so there aren't any surprises. The allowed field, as you can see, is auto-calculated as 4% of both your FY 2021 award and your ARPA award. And then any figures that you included in your administrative project will show up automatically in the actuals field. So you don't manually add any numbers in this area of the FSR that's coming from your admin project. And then the difference is also auto-calculated. So if you notice any incorrect calculations in this section, we recommend saving the FSR again. It's kind of saving is kind of like a refresh or a sync button in this way to kind of make sure that the numbers and all the pieces of the SPR are talking to each other. So once again, we are working with an SPR that's used to dealing with one award at a time, but making accommodations for two at the same time. So what we had to do to accommodate reporting financials for both of the awards in the financial status report, we are asking you to enter both of the log numbers for your FY 2021 award and your ARPA award in the financial status report form. And you'll see that field, that federal grant or other identifying number assigned by a federal agency field, one of the longer field descriptions. You'll see in the example that both log numbers are located there. And you can find these numbers if you're wondering where they are, if you haven't heard of them before. They're on your award document, which in REACH is called the Notice of Action. So you'll be able to find those and we can program officers can also help you locate them if you need to, if you need that assistance. And the total federal funds authorized is also automatically filled. And we just pointed out here because it might look like an exceptionally high number or one that you can't point to a specific source. And that's because it's combining both of your 2021 awards again. And you see this example from Alabama here. At the top is their regular 2021 allotment, and the bottom is their ARPA funds, and it's combined into one field. And then another element about the financial status report that we wanted to cover related to match. It's also auto-calculated, and you'll notice that they're auto-populated from project fields. So we talked about working on your projects first, so that way your FSR has the numbers that it needs. But we just want to remind you here that unlike the other elements of the FSR that is taking into account both allotments, because the match and MOE requirements were waived for ARPA, you're only going to see the required match calculated from your regular 2021 award and not your ARPA. And then the very final field at the bottom, the federal share of net outlays, should be an auto population, an auto sum of all of the LSTA fund numbers in your projects. So now I'm going to turn it over to Cindy Boyden to talk about best practices.
Thanks, Dennis. So this is the portion of the webinar that shifts from information related to ARPA funds reporting and into a more of a refresher in general best practices for the SPR. I'm going to kick off this section by going over some first steps as a new user, as well as some suggested approaches for preparing your SPR report. If you do not have a login for the SPR, your IMLS program officer can set you up in the system by creating an account for you. Your username is your email address, and we will send you your password. You can change your password by going into the account management section of the SPR after you've logged in. It's worth noting that Chrome and Firefox are recommended browsers for the system. Issues with saving and editing may occur when you open up two browser windows or tabs for the SPR at the same time. So it's best to try to avoid that. And this can often occur when users want to look back at the prior year's reports while completing the current year's. However, this can often lead to editing and reporting bugs. One of the first things you should do when logging into the SPR for the first time is updating or verifying your own information, as well as the information about your state library, which we touched on earlier related to the UEI. All three of these options are in the account management menu. If your state library grants subawards, don't forget to maintain the subaward info section in the SPR. And here's what it looks like. This section is separate from the project section of the SPR and provides information about subawards beyond just the ones that were funded. Some writing tips. When working through the SPR and individual projects, in addition to using plain language, remember that the report is happening after the completion of activities and should be written in the past tense. The SPR reports should avoid library jargon while keeping in mind that the text will be accessible to the general public. And the one exception to using specific names or names of people in the report is with outside consultants when it is acceptable to reference names. When working through your abstracts, IMLS again does not need a general SLAA program description or history. You want to think about, what did you do this year? What was accomplished? We would prefer that you avoid bullet listing. We would like it in a paragraph format. And should you decide to copy and paste into the abstract text box, just remember to use the format stripping workaround and avoid colored text. If you have subawardees or project directors filling these out in the SPR, these are really important points to relay to them. And always review or proofread prior to submission to IMLS. So when working on statewide projects, an example of a statewide project might be statewide databases. They are provided to everyone in the state. However, something like summer reading, while potentially made available to the entire state, does not mean that each library utilized funds or resources for summer reading. If this is the case, summer reading would not be a statewide project, even if the grantee is reported as the SLAA. Instead, in the activity area, indicating the participating libraries by name or number would be optimal for reporting. If you are interested in bundling projects, several criteria must be met to combine a subaward into a single project. At a minimum, they support the same intent and cover the same subjects. For example, if a state completed a continuing ed project offering grants to libraries for staff to participate in a library course, then you could list them as one project with different locales. Well, the libraries that these folks they consider their home libraries. In cases like these, you would list a state library contact as the project director. Indicate the subrecipients in activity locales, if possible, or report them by number to keep the administrative burden in check. And this is another example of bundling. 75 libraries within a state utilized funds to purchase PPE. These projects could be bundled into a single line item in the SPR, so long as the libraries were counted somewhere, either by institution name or institution type at the activity level. And don't forget, SLAAs can always upload additional materials to support various projects or provide details if appropriate. Now, the information on this slide might look familiar to you, at least those that worked on the most recent 5-year plans. As a reminder, projects should have one intent. There are 14 intents to choose from with 6 focal areas. Intents are critical to knowing how to report and define your projects. Intents are related to the crosswalk, your state library submitted in their 5-year plan. State goals correspond to focal areas and projects correspond to intents. And now Madison is going to provide some more details on reporting individual projects. Madison?
Thanks so much, Cindy. We are going to say a little more about intents and about how you only need to assign one intent per project. Here we have an example of 2 intents that have similar subjects for a project. You should be able to refer to the crosswalk that you developed as part of your 5-year plan to see what intent was identified for that specific project. If it's a new project that didn't have, that wasn't around and wasn't a part of your 5-year plan, then make sure it just has one intent that you think fits best. This is really important because when your evaluator attempts to do the 5-year evaluation, they're going to take each project and describe how it met a particular goal and intent in your 5-year plan. It'll be a lot easier for them if there's only one intent. Now, here's just an illustration of a sample crosswalk. Again, good idea to get in the habit of using that crosswalk and having it align with your SPR. So when you start reporting your projects for that new 2023 to 2027 cycle, your evaluator will have a much easier time with their analysis and you can better track your progress along the way. Now, activities. The writing tips that we mentioned previously still apply to how you're going to do your activities. An overall principle of the SPR framework is limiting activities to 10 per project. A related principle is that more complex or more expensive projects will likely have more activities. So to consider something as an activity, it should account for at least 10% of the budget of the total budget, which includes both match and in-kind and federal funds. Now, let's talk about activity descriptions. Here we have an example of one activity abstract that briefly outlines what happened. It's very succinct and clear and provides only the necessary info. You can see also here that the activity type and mode selections underneath the instruction consultation. And activities also are going to prompt you to enter quantities, such as how long the program lasted in minutes, how many consultations, which pertains to this specific example, or how many books were purchased if it's a purchase activity. And a somewhat common issue we see is leaving those fields blank and only with 0. So please be sure to fill something in when you're completing your activity information. Now, the selection of activity type should generally follow the spending and focus of the project. And we have those 4 activity types here. In particular, the big one we see often is staff attending conferences. You want to use the instruction-other activity and mode. And also a big one is the procurement activity. Procurement is only used, it's used very sparingly. It's only used and is only available for you to select for when you have the institutional capacity intent. Here you can see 3 examples of purchases that are not procurement as defined by the SPR system. So, you know, databases and laptops and such can be categorized as something else. So outcomes, activity outcomes. We have outcomes reporting built into the SPR, both at the activity level and at the overall project level. An outcome is the effect of programs and services, something that changes an individual's life or the community. It's a change in their knowledge, attitude, skills, behaviors, or condition. And we are trying to document what changed for participants due to their use of a service or program. So this chart is for activity outcomes based on what you choose as the activity type. There are 4 times when you will be prompted to include activity outcome information. 3 of them involve serving the library workforce, and the 1 other is surveying the general public. For example, if you have an instruction for library workforce and it is in the mode of a program, then you should have surveyed the participants. Also make note that IMLS does not expect you to have surveyed children. Anyone under 18 should not be surveyed. So activities that involve children do not have to have outcome figures. That said, we do want you to include overall project outcomes in that project outcome section that contains information on maybe how many children participated in some of the things that you observed. Now, budget reminders. We don't want to touch extensively on the budget area of the report in this refresher webinar, but we do have some general tips. When reporting on conference registrations, you want to report those as services, not travel. For any sort of apps, software, or licenses purchases, also report those in the services box, not supplies. And overall, just please avoid using vague or misleading terms in your descriptions of what you purchased in the budget box. Anything that says other or related costs or miscellaneous is not going to be very helpful. So please be more specific. Now for the salaries and wages budget box section, we want to make sure that you're providing enough information. When filling out information for salaries and wages, please provide the position titles and the FTE equivalents, especially when there is more than one staff person included in this budget area. Now, these two screenshots here provide good examples of budget descriptions. The first shows the differentiation between LSTA and state funds, which is great. And the second shows how a single staff member salary is allocated across multiple projects. Now, remember what Cindy said, we do not need names, we just need position titles here. And finally, with the budget, the other operational expenses box gets a lot of attention. This area is only for indirect costs and should only be used for the indirect costs of a subrecipient. If you, the SLAA, incur indirect costs, those should be represented in the administrative project, not in an individual project. Now, here are some examples on this slide. The two descriptions at the top were returned because the charges described in those boxes are not considered that other operational expenses because they directly relate to the cost of the project. However, you can see how these types of charges could be misperceived as an other charge or charges that don't necessarily fit into any other of the budget box. But for the purposes of the SPR, however, this category is solely reserved for indirect costs. In both these instances, it would be better if those costs were in the services box. Now, the example at the bottom of the slide shows how this category should be used to capture indirect costs of subrecipients. The specific indirect cost rate percentage that was charged to the subrecipient's grant is key and encouraged to include. Again, if you have a project that combines multiple subgrants to several subrecipients, it would be ideal if you itemize this box and include the subrecipient and their indirect cost rate here. Additional materials, I believe Cindy mentioned this before, but consider all types of relevant documents to include and upload in the additional materials section of your project. You've heard us say it before, we love photographs. They're great for us just, to get to know more about the project. And we can also use them if possible for social media and blog posts on our end of things. Also attaching any sort of outreach materials, curricula, website links, sign-up forms, or marketing materials, anything that really helps tell the story of the project. We'd love to see it. project tags. These are of interest to IMLS for a national level analysis and could be helpful to you as well in terms of organizing your projects. This is an open text field in the SPR. Someone asked earlier in the chat if we have any sort of specific terms or controlled vocabularies. We don't. You can use any terms you feel are appropriate. And if you have multiple terms, make sure you separate them with commas. Now, match-only projects. I know some states may need to add a match-only project, which is where the budget would have $0 reported for LSTA funds, but their match funds are reported. These will be reported as a regular project with budget figures, and make sure those figures are reported to the appropriate categories. And you will need to identify an intent for that project as well as at least one activity. They're treated just like every other project in your report. All right, so once you have run the gauntlet and completed your project data entry, make sure that the project status has changed to completed. You have to do this before project validation or certification by your chief. The best way to do it is that you can go to the list projects area and do a bulk status change, which is what is shown here in the screenshot. Now, the administrative project and the FSR also need to be changed separately. You still have to open the administrative project to change its status. And then after all of that is completed, we'd like you to switch the status of the final financial report at the very end of all of your reporting. That way it will reflect the final information in all of your projects. So it's time for your chief to certify, your authorized official to certify. Here is the path, a screenshot of the path they will take after they log into the SPR to certify. This path is the same for LSTA coordinators if they want to validate their report to head off any error messages that may come through. And by doing this, this will certify your 2021 final reports, your final projects, your final FSR, and your administrative project. Someone asked previously about the interim FFR. That requires a completely separate certification. So you can certify the interim FFR first before completing any additional final reporting. You can ensure that the certification went through by checking the project status under the list of projects. It'll say certified, or you can look at the certification fields in the FSR, which once certified should contain the name and date stamp of your chief. Okay, reminders, final reminders. We love reminders. Here are your reporting deadlines, but pay attention to those of you who have individual different deadlines because of grant extensions. You can also take a look at our grant cycle calendar, which is a part of the Grants to States manual we have online. The SPR also does have a sandbox for practicing and training in it. So if you'd like to use that and you don't yet have access, let your program officer know and we can get you access to that. Okay, coming soon, some coming attractions for you to anticipate. So the first one does not have to do with the SPR, it has to do with eGMS Reach. Login.gov is a government-wide security feature that's already used on a bunch of other federal sites, including SAM.gov, that secures dual-factor authentication and just increases our level of security. Soon, you will need to have a login.gov account in order to access eGMS Reach. Your current login credentials as you log in now will no longer be valid, but your email address that is associated with your Reach account, so that your work email address, must be registered in login.gov. When this is enacted, we're thinking it's going to happen at the end of the year. We don't yet have a solid date yet. But when it's activated, you're going to have 3 options when you get to the EGMS Reach landing page. The first is just linking your already existing login.gov account to your Reach account with the same email address. The second option is if you have a login.gov account, but you don't have it under your work email address, you can have multiple email addresses under the same account. So it's just a matter of adding in your work email address and then connecting it to your Reach account. And the third option is if you don't have a login.gov account at all, it'll just prompt you to create one, and then it will tie it to your Reach account. Again, we don't exactly know when this is going to be activated. It will likely be at the end of the calendar year, and we will give you plenty of warning beforehand. And another new feature, and this is within the SPR, is that we have refreshed the site visit checklist and have moved it as a fillable form in the SPR. We will be doing more training on this at our annual conference in the spring, but it's already there. If you want to log into the SPR and take a look, it's under the account management tab, and have fun with it. See what's going on. Well, we have blown through a ton of content, and we actually made it under the hour. If you have any very specific questions, feel free to contact us individually or contact your program officer, but I am going to take some time to go through some of the questions that came through in the chat. Let's see. As someone mentioned, if you have an ARPA extension, you can certify your interim report first separately from all of your final reports. So make sure you do that. Make sure you certify your interim report by December 30th, 2022. ARPA funds. Okay, so if you have projects that mix both ARPA funds and LSTA annual allotment funds, and you're not sure if you should use the ARPA prefix on the project title, if you're using majority ARPA funds, make sure you use that ARPA title, that ARPA prefix. If it's just a little bit of ARPA funds in a mostly LSTA allotment project, you don't need to use the prefix, but make sure you do specify which funds were ARPA funds within the budget boxes in your descriptions. As we mentioned, if you have specific tags you want to use, we don't have controlled vocabulary, so you can choose the tags you want. For administrative costs and match costs, ARPA did not require any matching funds, but if you have matching funds that you want to contribute and report, you're certainly welcome to do so to contribute to your match requirement. And also, if some of those went to your administrative costs, you can include them in the report. Does the intent in the SPR for the project have to be one of the intents we have tied to the goal in our 5-year plan? Sorry, my brain needs to catch up. Answer this. There may be times when you would take a detour from your 5-year plan crosswalk, and that's fine, but it's meant to be a helpful roadmap. If you follow it, your evaluator will have an easier time. The next question is for instruction activities. For session length in minutes, we should use an average length, correct? Or do we total the length of all sessions and use that number? Am I answering the right one? This is Tara's question. You'd generally want to use the average time for an activity in minutes. Next question, will the system allow us to leave the survey results blank when there are no results, such as projects involving children? Yes, that's correct. Those are not required fields. So the criteria for a certifying officer, this is going to be your authorized certifying official that signs all those magical forms that are required of you when you receive your awards and get your 5-year plans approved. And only one person at your agency can be designated as the authorized certifying official. And we have to have one listed at all times. So if you're not sure who that is, let your program officer know. March conference, no dates yet. Since the FSR pulls info automatically, it won't be finalized if we receive an ARPA extension. That's correct. Just report on your LSTA allotment spending by your original deadline. Okay, we do have 5 minutes left. Does anyone have any additional questions? And we will have a recording of this presentation ready for you all as soon as possible and send it out when it's ready. Any ideas on fiscal year 2023 funds?
Wendy Copeland, you don't get anything.
To all states except South Carolina. No, we don't. We don't.
Glad we got that out of the way.
Yeah. Pull that Band-Aid off.
She should expect nothing less from me.
Yeah. But we don't. We have a CR, congressional resolution until mid-December, I believe. Maybe we'll have a budget then. Maybe it'll be another congressional resolution. We're not sure yet. Who should you contact when you experience SPR system issues? Great question. Contact your program officer. They'll either be able to help you troubleshoot, or they will contact our IT staff who will help correct any issues that come up. Wonderful. I'm so happy to see all of you joining us today. We're really appreciative that you take the time to learn the system with us. Since we have no further questions and we got 3 minutes to spare, I suppose we can let folks go. But again, you have our names, you have our numbers, you have our email addresses. Feel free to reach out at any time if you need assistance. And thanks so much for coming again.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.